Disclosure: in 2020 I was invited by the Panzermuseum. Recently I did a comparison of the M7 Priest and the German Wespe self-propelled artillery guns. There were some oversights in my video and some errors as well. The issues are about the payload, comparing the Priest to the Hummel, and the range of the guns. Be aware I'm currently short on time, so this video won't contain visuals, just footage. A major oversight was that I did not explain why I compared these two vehicles with each other, since for me it's very obvious, yet I know Panzer divisions and their US equivalents reasonably well. Now the reason why comparing the M7 Priest and Wespe for me makes so much sense comes down to several factors. First, the obvious one, they have the same caliber. Second, both also use the standard artillery guns of the respective infantry divisions. Now these points I basically mentioned. But the third one is the most important. Both the M7 Priest and Wespe serve the same role in the US Armored Division and the German Panzer Division, that of the light artillery on an armored chassis. So both the Wespe and Priest were used in the artillery battalions of their respective divisions, yet the US Armored Division had not heavy artillery batteries, unlike the German Panzer Division. The Hummel was used in the heavy batteries. This was in line with German doctrine, since the Hummel was equipped with a 150mm gun, and those served generally in the heavy artillery units of the respective divisions, both Panzer and infantry. If you want to know more about German artillery in World War II, see this video. Meanwhile, in the US Armored Division, there was no heavy self-propelled artillery. There was a vehicle that was equipped with it, namely the M12 gun motor carriage and its successor the M40 gun motor carriage, but those were not organic to the US Armored Divisions. So they were at least on the core level or higher. Additionally, these guns were produced in low numbers, namely around 100 for the M12. So comparing the M7 Priest to the Hummel might make sense in terms of weight and chassis, but generally it would be like comparing an M4 Sherman to a Tiger tank. The M4 was organic to the US Armored Divisions, the Tiger was not organic to German Panzer Divisions, besides a few Unicorn divisions. Tigers were organized in independent tank battalions that might be attached to a Panzer Division, similar like a unit with M12 might have been attached to an Armored Division, for a limited amount of time. Now I will also address a few comments as well. Someone suggested that I should compare the Wespe with the M8 Scott. To quote, "This would show the effect of a bigger gun in vehicles of similar size instead of different vehicles with similar sized guns." The M8 Scott was an M5 Stuart tank with a 75mm gun and basically a self-propelled howitzer, but its role was more specialized than that of the M7 Priest or Wespe. It was intended to help with assaulting enemy emplacements and provide direct support for tank units. Later it was replaced with the 105mm Sherman. As such, the M8 Scott stayed closer to the tanks it supported and generally were also organic to the respective battalion or regiment. In contrast, artillery generally stayed a bit more away from the front line, provided indirect fire, and was part of a different regiment, which was also part of a different arm. So the M Scott part of the tank arm, whereas Priest and the Wespe were part of the artillery arm. If you take a business comparison, the M8 Scott was in the same department as the tanks, like sales, whereas the M7 Priest was in another department, like marketing. In other words, the M8 Scott was not part of the divisional artillery, but organic to the tank units like the medium tank battalions, namely in the headquarters company. And since the M8 was used in the headquarters company of the medium tank battalions, we don't really have an equivalent in the Panzer Division 44, at least not on that level as we have with the Wespe and Priest, where we have a match in arm, organization, role and caliber. The Germans had similar weapons like the Grille, Sturmpanzer, Sturmgeschütz, Sturmhaubitze and the Sonderkraftfahrzeug 251 with the 75mm gun, but in terms of organizations they were not part of the tank battalions. Some of them were not even part of the Panzer Division 44. Not to mention that they generally were quite different in weight, firepower, chassis and armor layout and protection. If we look at the Grille and the Sonderkraftfahrzeug 251 with the 75mm gun, they were part of the Panzergrenadierregiment of the Panzer Division 44, but not the Panzer battalions, so the infantry arm. The Panzer battalions of the Panzer Division 44 in their headquarters company had Flakpanzer, regular Panzer and recon combat engineers, but not support weapons like the Grille. So again, just looking at the technical data is not always helpful, since the role is more important. Of course, in some cases the role does not really convert well or exist. For instance, I think there's not really an equivalent to the Su-76M in German or Western Allied arsenal. And the classification as tank hunter for the Su-76M seems wrong, although it was used in that role. on occasion. Probably the most interesting suggestion was the following one, to quote, "This is apples to oranges comparison. A comparison to the 10.5 cm leichte Feldhaubitze 18/6 of Waffenträger 4B would have been more appropriate." The short answer is, I generally don't compare unicorns with workhorses. So what do I mean by that? None of the Waffenträger I know ever saw mass production. I generally, with a few exceptions, talk about real weapons. This means that they were at least produced beyond a few prototypes. Probably the only exception I did was the video on the Dora gun. But then again, it is a huge gun, and railway guns generally were produced in the 1 to 2 digit range. The Elephant Ferdinand also was limited in production number of around 90, yet at least that means 2 battalions, at least initially. It also served from 1943 to 1945. Finally, the Red Army was quite concerned about the Elephant Ferdinand as well, according to Peter Samsonov from Tank Archives. The Soviets were more concerned about the Ferdinand than the Tiger in many ways. There were also some errors in the video and some more information was brought up. The first one can be seen as an error or not. It was definitely an oversight on my side. I used the regular leichte Feldhaubitze 18 for comparison, not the leichte Feldhaubitze 18M, which was equipped with a muzzle brake and an improved recoil system. This allowed it to have a longer range with a new shell that could reach 12,325 meters. Additionally, this shell also had a larger payload of 2.1 kg. One issue with this shell is that I don't know if it was a special shell or not. One commenter notes it became standard issue referring to Hawk, but I looked into Hawk's book and there it is still mentioned as a special shell. Now, if this shell FHGR Fern was the standard layout for the Wespe or was issued in large numbers to the Wespe, this would definitely change the situation, as so often the deeper one digs, the more questions arise. By the way, if you're interested in well-researched books based on sources from the German and Russian military archives, check out the books from our publishing house, the Military History Group. Yet it gets even more complicated. Thanks to some comments, I found now also a better German source, and there I noticed that there are generally 2 payloads given for the shells. One was with the pressed explosives and one that is cast explosives. The values differ and might explain the different values I found in the different sources. The problem is, I suspect the weight is not the only difference. The quality and or type of explosive used in each shell was not addressed. Furthermore, the user Hummingbird sent me another German source from September 1944 that indicates that the values might be outdated as well. The German source gives a payload of 2.21 kg for the FHGR Fern and 1.75 kg for the FHGR. He assumes that these were standard ammunition by this time, since the older shells are not mentioned. I assume that this is correct, but at the same time the table of the source is also a comparison between regular ammunition and armor-piercing discarding sabot ammo, so I'm not 100% sure. But wait, there's another issue about the explosive payload. This is tricky in many regards, and it became apparent to me that I made an oversimplification. One person commented that he is a former 105mm gunner and a 105mm commander from 30 years ago. He notes that the shell weight, not just the payload, is more important, since a thicker shell wall would lead to more or different fragmentation. Yet I ask a German combat engineer that is more familiar with explosives, and he notes that the comment makes only partially sense, namely when it comes to quality of explosives. He further adds that it is important to address the proportion of shell weight and payload. Additionally, the purpose of the projectile as well, for instance, should it explode on impact or with a delayed fuse, thus a direct comparison might not make much sense. And here we have some more information from Hawk that looked at the World War II data from both sides. To quote Hawk, "During the course of the war, much fundamental research was done, and more has been done since, into determining just how big a fragment was needed to incapacitate a man. If it can be shown, for example, that a fragment weighing 2.8 grams is lethal, then a 10-pound 4.54 kilogram shell can be expected to produce 1,600 fragments. A shell which produces but 800 is obviously less efficient. On the other hand, a shell producing 3,000 1.4 gram fragments is not delivering lethal units and is therefore totally inefficient. Yet that in 1945 it was generally accepted that the Allied side with the 1.1 gram fragment had used the ideal size. Still, I must add that I don't really know if my assessment of the Priest being the winner in the firepower category is correct, although considering that the gun used in the Priest was used by the US forces since 1941 and is still in use today, although with modifications, I doubt it is significantly worse than the leichte Feldhaubitze 18. So I assume that at best for the Wespe it would be a tie. Thank you to the following commenters in the chronological order: Kim Yannick, Ghost Maxi, Temp H, Temp G, Hummingbird, and Lensley for providing additional information. If I pronounced your username wrong, you're welcome. And especially Hummingbird, since he added a lot of additional information on request. Be aware that I likely missed some other useful comments. Thank you for the Panzermuseum for inviting me, thanks to Andrew for reviewing the script, thank you for watching, and see you next time.